L'kuta Sichos Chelek Chaf Zayin Tazria Aleph L'Nishmas of Yosef Ben Yamin Ben Rabbanasha Kaltman. We are also learning today L'Schus Chaya Mushke Bas Chava Yael for a Refuah Shlema Ukreva. Very fascinating sikha we have today on the topic of Tumas Yoldis, the Tumah of a woman who has just given birth. And we're going to see a very interesting perspective from Rashi. Very fascinating. And in order to jump into this, I'm going to begin with an introduction. The first introduction will be to explain the concept of Tumas Yoldis. And what I'm going to explain is how it is according to the din of Torah. Today we do not follow this quite as I'm going to say it because there was a takana of Reb Zera. But that is not relevant. What is relevant is that in the beginning of this week's parsha, the Torah lays out the following rules. And that is that a woman, after she has given birth, becomes tameh. Tameh means to her husband. Tameh means to eating kachim and to going into the Beis HaMikdash. After 7 days, she goes to the mikveh. This is regarding to a baby boy. A baby girl is 14 days. At the end, after going to the mikveh, she then has 33 days for a baby boy or 66 days for a baby girl, which are called Yemei Tohar. During this time, and she is Tohar to her husband, which means even if there is a discharge of blood during this time, she remains Tohar to her husband. However, she is not allowed to eat truma, she's not allowed to eat kachim, she's not allowed to go into the Beis HaMikdash. At the end of the either 40 days, meaning 7 plus 33 in the case of the boy, or 80 days, meaning 14 plus 66 for the baby girl, she then brings a carbon on the next day, a carbon chatos and a carbon oila, and then once again she's allowed to eat kachim, she's allowed to go into the Beis HaMikdash. There is a time period after the days finished, 40 days in the case of the baby boy, 80 days in the case of the baby girl, where it's called Harev Shemesh, which means the sun set on the final day, but she has not yet brought a carbon. And this brings me to my second introduction, the term Mechusrei Kapara. She right now she did her time, so to speak. She waited out the 40 days, but she has not yet brought her carbon, and therefore she is called a mechusar kapara. The same din would apply to a mitzayda or to a zav or to a zava that went to the mikveh, waited out the time, went to the mikveh. The day ended, so the time has passed, but they have not yet brought their carbon. They too go into the category of a mechusar kapara. The din of the mechusar kapara is going to be discussed in this sikha. What is the din of the mechusar kapara? In other words, a person that became tameh went to the mikveh, which is often called a tvul yoim, which means they went to the mikveh and now they have to wait for the day to end. And they had harev shemesh, which means the sun set, so the day ended. So let's say in the case of the woman who gave birth, the full 40 days have passed, but she has not yet brought a carbon, so she's called mechusar kapara. We'll soon see what the din is with regards to her tumah or her tahara, but she's in a state where she's lacking her carbon. And that is going to be part of today's discussion. So we have a Tumas Yoldis. We're talking about a woman who gave birth. There's the first 7 days in the case of the boy. There's 33 days of Yemei Tohar. And then there is the end of those days after which she has to bring a carbon. Then there was the concept of Mechusar Kapara, which is someone, a Yeldis, a Zav, a Zava, a Nida, not a Nida, a Mitzayra, that still have to bring their carbon, but they've waited out the time. They are called Mechusrei Kapara, and we're going to discuss their din in this sikha. So let us begin. In Pasuk V'Seif Parshas Yoldis, in the Pasuk of this week's Parsha, at the end of the Parsha of Yoldis, which means the very first section of this week's Parshas Tazria, which discusses the dinim of a woman who gave birth. So this is Pasuk Ches. Says V'chiper Oleh HaKayin V'Tahera. The Kayin will be mechaper for her, will atone for her, and she will become pure, tahir, ritually pure. Learn the Gemara in Yavamis, and other places learns as follows. If she's saying that through the carbon she's becoming tahir, means that until this point she was tamei. As a mechusar kippurim, so the Gemara derives from this pasuk, from this word v'tahira in our pasuk, as a mechusar kippurim, nachdem was taval v'ala, someone who already went to the mikveh, unheriv shimshay, and someone who waited till the end of the day, eider gebracht kaparasa, before he brought his carbon, is tamei legabi kama dinim, is still considered tamei with regards to several dinim. Aleph is noch da afem that Isa from Chalkedesh leisiga gamer achilas kachim. He's not allowed to touch any kachim, which includes the fact that he's not allowed to eat kachim, which means, just to clarify, that truma becomes mutter. Before hariv shemesh, before the day ends, he can't eat truma either. But once the day ended and he had been to the mikveh, truma he could eat, but he cannot eat kachim. If he served, did the avodah as a kohen in the Beis Hamikdash, is chayiv misa, because a tamei person that served in the Beis Hamikdash is chayiv misa, and the Gemara is learning that this person, the mechusar kapara, is in the category of a tamei. Gimel, that is a mechusar kapara passel the avodah, as well as if he did the avodah is passel. It has to be redone. Okay, so that's the Gemara. The Gemara sees the word v'tahira and says, this teaches us that until this point, until the carbon, she is tamei, or he is tamei if he's mechusar kapara, and the relevance is these three dinim. He can't eat kachim, he can't serve in the Beis Hamikdash, and he cannot do avodah. And if he does the avodah is possible, and if he himself is chayiv misa. The Rambam in Sefer Hayad brings the drasha and Tzvayata. The Rambam brings this drasha in two separate places. Number one, legabi mechusar kippurim sh'avad as avodas psula, that the mechusar kippurim who did the avodah, someone who did not yet bring his carbon, and he didn't avodah in Beis Hamikdash, the avodah is not acceptable. Beis legabi dem iser knisa lemikdash, with regards to entering into the mikdash. Me Ezras Yisrael v'lifnim, beyond the Ezras Yisrael, which means he's allowed to go till the chel, but beyond that he's not allowed to go. And says the Rambam. Bring this limud that he's still considered tamei, or b'shinu lashon, but the Rambam uses a different lashon than the Gemara. V'tohera miklal sha'adayin le'nigmere or gamra taharasa. This teaches us that she has not yet completed the process of purification. So the Gemara says miklal she'itmeya. This teaches us that she's tamei. The Rambam says miklal she'le'nigmere taharasa. This teaches us she's not yet tahir. From Lashon Rambam is move on as the chesana from mechusar kippurim is nit azoi machbes dem chiyuv from tumah. So the Rebbe deduces from the Rambam that the problem here is not that he's still in active tumah. Koloim, meaning to say, and this is what we don't. This is what we're not. This is what's not the pshat. As chochas durch dem was tav taval and ha'erev shimshei. Is a givarin tar lekamyan ukelech achilas truma. That despite the fact that after he went to the mikveh and after the day ended, he becomes tar to a certain degree. With, for example, he's allowed to eat truma. But with regards with regards to eating kachim, with regard to going to Beis Hamikdash, tumah remains when the fire is there. Asli kedesh when the chanas of the mikdash, he's not allowed to touch kachim. He's not allowed to go into the mikdash. That's not the pshat. The pshat is not that the tumah remains. There's still active tumah upon this person, because the Rambam says shadayin le nigmer tarasa. No, das is mitzad shlili chisarim betara. The pshat in the Rambam is, says the Rebbe, that he's lacking tara. Not that he is actively tamei, but his tara is incomplete. He's lacking the completion of it that would happen through the carbon. So the Rebbe is now explaining the Rambam that despite the fact that the Gemara says that until the woman brings the carbon, she is tmeya, the Rambam says differently. She's not tamei. She's just not yet tahir, as if to say that there's three stages. There's tamei, there is not tamei anymore, but not yet tahir, and then tahir. And the mechusar kippurim, according to the Rambam, or mechusar kapara, according to the Rambam, is someone who is not tamei anymore, but not yet tahir. The Rambam actually says this very explicitly. Why are they called lacking atonement? Each of these, even though he became tired from his tumah, and he went to the mikveh, and the sun set. Adayin hu chaser is still lacking something. V'legamra taharasei, his tara, his purification process, is not complete enough. Kidei lechel bekachim, that he should be able to eat kachim, he should be allowed to eat kachim. Atzayavi karban, until he brings the carbon. The koydem sheyavi kaparasei, and before he brings this carbon, asuru lechel bekachim, he can't eat kachim. K'mishvarna p'sulei hamikdashim. Das heißt, the reason is nicht der Fall, but there is noch tummy. The prohibition here is not because he's still in active tumah. Nor weil is chaser b'tarasei, his tara is incomplete. Another raya, another very compelling proof that this is the shita of the Rambam. Besides the fact that the Rambam uses the term shadayin lenigma tarasa, and besides the fact that the Rambam in Hilchos Mechusrei Kapara says legamra tarase, we see another proof in the Rambam. Was beneged dem isel likanas lemikdash learned this up the Gemara of an oy tumasei boy. I'm sorry, not besides. I jumped ahead of myself. I'm sorry, but we see from the very fact that the Rambam uses v'taheda as the daya, the Gemara uses the pasuk eitu masay boy to teach me that he can't go into the Beis Hamikdash. The Rabbi's mechusek kapara. This teaches us that even mechusek kapara cannot go into the Beis Hamikdash. The Rambam learned this up from pasuk v'taheda. Miklash adayin legamra tarasa. The Rambam learns from the words v'taheda to teach us that the Tara is incomplete, showing us that the fact that the Mechusik Kippurim cannot go into the Beis Hamikdash is not because Oitu Masoi Boy, because he's still Tamei. It's just because he was lacking Tara. And it has a very practical application in halacha. Since the Rambam holds that Mechusik Kippurim is not actively Tamei, he is just lacking Tara. Complete Tara. The Rebbe Paskin the Rambam as a mechusik kippurim she'achal kedush she'shimish, that a mechusik kippurim that ate kachim or served in the Beis Hamikdash is nit chayiv misay kares, not chayiv misay because it's not tamei. He can't eat kachim yet because his Tara is incomplete. But if he did, you can't say he's a tamei she'shimish or a tamei she'achal kachim, which is chayiv misay. He's not a tamei anymore. At kan the shit of the Rambam. For now, this is the shita of the Rambam. The Rebbe explains the shita very, very well. The Rambam holds that a person who's a mechusik kippurim, whether it's a yildis or a mitzeder or a zava that went to the mikveh, and the day ended, the sun set, and they did not yet bring their carbon, although they are not tamei anymore, they still cannot eat kachim going to the Beis Hamikdash because they're lacking a complete Tara. But this is very, very important. They are beyond their tumah, and therefore, if they did do this, they are not chayiv misa because the tumah has ended. It's just that the Tara has not yet fully commenced, and therefore they're still not allowed to eat kachim or going to the Beis Hamikdash. This is the shita of the Rambam. Masha'enkin the Ravid halt as a mechusik kippurim is chayiv misa. The Ravid argues on the Rambam, and he says that a mechusik kippurim that ate kachim or a mechusik kippurim that served in the Beis Hamikdash is chayiv misa, is absolutely chayiv misa. Und wer is masik auf den Rambam as the Ravid challenges the Rambam. One raya he brings is from what the Rebbe brought in the brackets in a couple paragraphs ago, that the Gemara in Makis says that we learn from the pasuk Oitu Masei Boy to include a mechusik kippurim. The mechusik kippurim is chayiv misa because Oitu Masei Boy is still tamei. Ve'ed v'tahera ksiv b'yeledes miklal da'atash t'tmeihi. Also, he brings the limud of the Gemara, which we brought in the beginning of the Sikha, the fact that it says v'tahera is masma that till now she was tamei. And we said in the Gemara in Zvachim a third point in his question on the Rambam. Mechusik Kippurim the Zav Kizav Dami, that a Zav that is Mechusik Kippurim has the same category, has the same din as a full-fledged Zav. Ubetesefta the Zvachim and the Tesefta Zvachim. Lists the Mechusik Kippurim of a Zav as someone who's Chayiv Misa. So says that I to the Rambam, how can you say that a Mechusik Kippurim is not Chayiv Misa? If we see in the Gemara in Makis, in the Gemara in Zvachim, in another Gemara in Zvachim about Zav, in with the Tesefta and Zvachim, all implying that Mechusik Kippurim that served in the Beis Hamikdash or that ate kachim is Chayiv Misa. Varum says the Rebbe explains from the Ravid learned as the get of Mechusik Kippurim is as bees me brengt die kapara is noch verblieben von der friede ketuma. The Ravid holds that the definition of a mechusik kippurim is that until he brings his carbon, the original tuma remains, and therefore If he does something that a tummy is not allowed to do, he's chayiv misa. And it says, "Blaze nifka givar and the chelek hatuma was ma'akir gven achilas truma." We do lift the aspect of the tuma that did not allow him to eat the tuma, which means a mechusar kippurim is allowed to eat truma. I said tuma, I meant truma. Mechusar kippurim is allowed to eat truma. So because some of the tuma was lifted, but the rest of it remains, according to the Ravid, and which is the mashmos of the Gemara as well, which is why he holds that mechusar kippurim is chayiv misa. So we have over here a machlekes Rambam and Ravid. Rambam holds a mechusar kippurim is not chayiv misa because the Rambam holds that a mechusar kippurim is not tummy anymore. He's just not completely toher yet. And the Ravid holds that mechusar kippurim is tummy, still tummy. He retains his original tuma, and therefore, if he was to serve in the Beis Hamikdash, he's chayiv misa. Now we're going to go to learn Shittas Rashi. What does Rashi say? Rashi also brings the drasha of the Gemara on the word v'tahera. The truth is that we should probably read this word v'tahara, because as we'll see later in the Sikha, Rashi brings this limud on the previous pasuk Zayin, where it says v'tahara mimukayr dameha. So the Gemara brings it on brings this limud on pasuk Ches, where it says v'chiper aleha hakayin v'tahera. And Rashi brings this limud on pasuk Zayin, where it says v'tahara mimukayr dameha, and that's in Orah 22. He references pasuk Zayin, and in comments of Dalid, where the Rebbe is going to explain why Rashi stelzich on why Rashi is bringing this pirush on the pasuk Zayin, whereas while in the Gemara it's brought on pasuk Ches. So Rashi brings this drasha on the word v'tahara. Aber is mishane from Lashon Gemara. He changes the Gemara as the Rambam did, aber nit wie the Rambam. But his shinoi, Rashi's difference is different than the Rambam's difference. This is what Rashi says: v'tahara miklal sha'ad kan hikruya tmeya. From this we learned that until this point she is called tamei. She's labeled tmeya. Now, why does Rashi not say shei tmeya like the Gemara says? So that's the Rebbe is going to explain the first thing. That's what Rashi sagt nit Gemara miklal shei tmeya yesh leimar. The fact that the Gemara Rashi doesn't say clearly tmeya, he says kriya tmeya, but doesn't say tmeya clearly is because as follows: von sei frier the computer of the Werte yemei tahara, yemei toyhar shala. Previously, it says that the days of either the 33 days for after the set first week, or the 66 days for the girl after the first 2 weeks are called Yemei Tara. Says Rashi, the days of her purity. Since Rashi refers to them as days of Tara and not specifying that this Tara is referring to between her and her husband, is muchach as the text and in ganzen Yemei Teyar b'shleimish and igmaru. This implies that we're not talking about the fact that she becomes permissible to her husband, but she retains tumah with regards to the kachim. No, Yemei Teyar. There are days of Tara. Und das, was der Pasuk is mazir b'chol kedush leisigav al mikdash leisavet meleis Yemei Tara. So why does the Pasuk tell me that she should not enter into the Beis Hamikdash, she should not touch kachim until these days of Tara are completed? It does machmas a zayte kesibes for a side reason. As eine nita miluim, there are certain things that have to be completed that have not yet been completed. So the velcha is eternit on mikdash, because of which she cannot enter into the Beis Hamikdash. She can't touch kachim. In other words, the Rebbe is saying that when Rashi sees the words Yemei Tara, he sees that these days are days of Tara. So when you say she can't go into the Beis Hamikdash, it must be for a different reason. Not because she's still tummy, because it's not tummy. The pasuk just said she's tired. So which means that Rashi, from the perspective of Pshutei Shel Mikra, says, is the tumas leida nifke geworden gleich noch die Zayne Yedal Yamim. The tumah of the birth was lifted at the end of the 7 or the 14 days, boy or girl, respectively. And certainly, when 33 days or 66 days pass, even though she has not yet brought the carbon, the tumah has already been lifted. Time is moving for verses the Chelek to sagen after the Moshe shei tmeya, and that's Rashi can say she's tummy. Because Rashi holds, based on what the pasuk said, that he called these days Yemei Tara, that obviously she's tired. The tumah that she contracted when she gave birth was lifted at the end of the week or 2 weeks, and certainly at the end of the 40 days or the 80 days, even before the carbon. So this is why Rashi doesn't say the word Tmeya, because you can't say Tmeya if the pasuk, Rashi's traditional mikra. The pasuk already said Yemei Tara. So you can't say she's tired and tummy at the same time. In the brackets, the Rebbe is going to show another diuk in Rashi, another line in Rashi that supports this approach. That Rashi is not calling her Tmeya. A piece is moving Lashon Rashi in the Rashi B'chol Kedesh. This helps us understand what Rashi says in the Rashi B'chol Kedesh. Rashi says the Rabbi says a truma. As he tar nit as in truma in dilamed gimul yamim. In other words, during the third, let's say it's a baby boy. So the 33 days after the 7 days of Tuma and the mikveh, until she gets to the end of the 33 days, she says, B'chol Kodesh leisiga, this includes Truma, says Rashi. Lefi says, Tfulas yoim aruch, shetavla l'soif shiva, ve'ein shimsha ma'iriv l'tara, at shkia sacham ashrim aboim. Okay? To translate, once she goes to the mikveh, after the 7 days, then she is now called a tvul yoim for 33 days straight. In other words, usually what happens is a person in other tumas, birth becomes tummy, he has to go to the mikveh, so he goes to the mikveh, and then he's called a tvul yoim, that he already went to the mikveh today, but he still has to wait for the end of the day. And then at the end of the day, after Hariv Shemesh, after the sun sets, then in some cases he has to bring a carbon, but then his time is up. Then he did his time. In this case, the mikveh was after 7 days. But all the 33 days is one long tfulas yoim until the Hariv Shemesh, until the sun sets on the 40th day. And a tvul yoim is not allowed to eat truma. Only after Hariv Shemesh is he allowed to eat truma. Only after the sun sets. Let's just clarify this. You have the period of tuma. Then you have sometimes a waiting period, or sometimes not. But at the end of whenever the waiting period is, the person goes to the mikveh. If it's a case where you're allowed to go to mikveh during the day, and he went to the mikveh during the day, he's called a tvul yoim. At this point, he still cannot eat truma, and certainly not eat kachim or go into the Beis Hamikdash. At the end of the day, when he becomes a Hariv Shemesh, we need to say the sun has set on him, the day, let's say the day has ended. At this point, he becomes a Mechusar Kippurim. A Mechusar Kippurim is not allowed to eat kachim, and is not allowed to go into his Beis Hamikdash, but is allowed to eat truma. So the pasuk says that this woman, for the 33 days of Yemei Tara, B'chol Kodesh leisiga, she shouldn't touch kachim. Says Rashi, that includes truma. She can't eat truma, because even though she went to the mikveh, but she didn't have Hariv Shemesh yet, because even though usually Hariv Shemesh is on the day of the mikveh, but in the case of a Yeldis, it's called a Yom Aruch. That the 33 days is one long day that carries from the mikveh at the end of the 7 days until the end of the 40th day, which is when we call when it counts for the Hariv Shemesh. So Rashi is saying, because she's considered a tvul yom for a long day. She went to the mikveh after 7 days. And her son doesn't set to become tahir until the sunset of the 40th day. 7 plus 33. The day that on the morrow she's going to bring the carbon. So the whole Rashi was perfectly understood until the last line. Why does Rashi have to emphasize that the next day she's going to bring a carbon? The whole point of Rashi is that she can't eat truma because she hasn't yet had the Hariv Shemesh of the 40th day. Why is it negeya to tell us that the next day there's going to be a carbon? Now the meeting Rashi is telling us, as geshem vibachi las kachim laachari malaysi meitara edes bringt dem carbon is doch nur was der chiyuv ha carbon halted up von achilas kachim aber is nitame. Rashi is telling us that just like with regards to eating kachim, which she cannot do because she didn't bring a carbon yet. But it's not because she's tamei. It's just that there is the step of bringing a carbon that's holding her back from eating other karbanos kachim. Al derech says, the same thing applies even in the 33 days, the eating of truma. It's not that she's tummy. No, to leave them was the chiv kaparas haterasa halted up. It's just that the fact that she didn't bring a carbon yet does not allow her to eat the truma. But it's not because she's tummy. Und der Last dass der Harav Shemesh von der Friedeke Tag, fahr der Harav Shemesh soll jemar boim, soll matter sein lachilas truma. Because she didn't bring the carbon yet, it does not allow the fact that the sun has set yet to allow her to eat truma. In other words, the Rebbe is bringing a proof from this Rashi that the issue that the reason she can't eat truma in the 33 days is not because she's tired. Not because she's tummy. Rather, it's because she didn't bring a carbon yet. Just like the kachim after the Harav Shemesh, where she also can't eat because she didn't bring a carbon yet. That's why he says, the issue here is the lack of carbon, not the fact that she's tummy. And therefore, that fits with the fact that Rashi says that since according to Psutish Mikra, that the Torah calls her Yemei Tahara, and therefore, from the end of the 7 or the 14 days, she becomes Tahir, and even the fact that she's not eating Truma is only because of the lack of a carbon, and not because she's still considered tummy. Und das ist der Tam Achilles zwischen Lashon Rashi und Rusha Alter und Lashon Hashas. Now let's go back to what we were saying. Rashi said Miklal Shei Kriya Tmeya. So the Rebbe explained what's the hechrich for Rashi to not say Shei Tmeya. He says Kriya Tmeya, which we'll get to in a minute. But why does he not say Shei Tmeya? Because he holds she's not Tamei. The Torah Pshutish Mikra says Yemei Tahara. She's tired. Fine, she's lacking a step to allow her to eat karbanos, even to eat truma during these Yemei Tahara. But she's not Tamei. And that's why there is a difference between the words Rashi uses and the words the Gemara uses. According to Rashi, a woman who gave birth was not yet brought her carbon. You can't call her Tmeya. You can't say that she is Tmeya. Because even before the Harav Shemesh, even before the sun set, she already was in days of Tayar. So you can't say, oh, now that she Harav Shemesh, but she didn't yet bring her carbon, she's tummy. She already previously wasn't tummy. The Gemara is not limited to Psutish Mikra. The Gemara is not bound by Psutish Mikra. The Gemara holds that with regards to Tumah, her husband, she's takatoyer in those 33 days. But with regards to Kachim, those 33 days are days of Tumah, including Truma. She's not allowed to eat Truma in those days as well. Which Rashi agrees that she can't eat Truma. The difference is the reason is different. Rashi says she can't eat Truma because she didn't bring the carbon yet. So she's a mechusa kapara, but she's not tamei. The Gemara holds she's tamei. When Eidah she brings kapara, say itmeya. But again, look, the Gemara holds that until she brings her carbon, she is absolutely tamei. So Rashi seems to be leaning in the direction of the Rambam. In other words, the Rambam said le nigmra taharasa. Rashi says kruya tamei is only called tamei, but she's not actually tamei. So Rashi seems to be leaning in the direction of the Rambam, although the words he uses are different. So now in Sif Gimel, the Rebbe is going to ask, what exactly does Rashi hold? What does it mean, Kriya Tmeya? And the Rebbe is going to tell us that Rashi does not hold exactly what the Rambam holds. Rashi has his own shita in this Inyan. So quickly, just to summarize, we introduced the Machlekes Rambam and Ravid, where the Rambam holds that a Mechusik Kippurim is loy nigmera taharasai. His Torah is incomplete, but he's not tamei anymore, and therefore he holds that if he ate kachim or he served in the Beis Mikdash, he's potter. Whereas the Ravid holds that a Mechusik Kippurim is still tamei, and therefore if he served in the Beis Mikdash or he ate kachim, he is chayiv misa. Rashi says kruya tmeya, which implies that she's not actually tamei, and Rebbe explains that according to Psutish Mikra that since the Torah calls those days Yemei Toyar, you can't say that she's actually tamei. The question that we have to now address is, what does it mean kruya tmeya? Therefore, since Rashi holds that the tumah of the birth was lifted, was released. So the words she's called tamei also doesn't really fit. Rashi could have said, like the Rambam said, that her Tara is incomplete because she didn't bring her carbon yet. But why is Rashi saying she's being called the Tmeya? If Rashi learned that das was noch achi of carbon is ma'akiv tara. If Rashi holds that the fact that she didn't bring the carbon is just withholding her tara, to say that it's vertnit tara bepeil, that just didn't activate the tara, but the tumah is long gone. Sorry, that the tara didn't kick in. It did not yet activate the tara. Is doch nit was kriyut min as is tmei bepeil. If Rashi holds like the Ravid that because she still didn't bring her carbon yet, her tara didn't begin. Then she's tmeya, it's not kriya tmeya, she's actually tummy. Und able to sagen, die Tumah is nifke geworden. Und das, was eternal death and kachim is a yisad study. And if we're going to say, like we understand from the Rambam, that the Tumah is gone, it's just, there's a side detail that she has to bring a carbon, which is why she can't eat kachim, is as doch nit kein inne von kriya tmeya. Then an yisad lechel kachim, is he bringing them carbon. So then it's not that she's called tamei. It's just that there's a prohibition upon her of eating kachim till she brings the carbon, but the tumah was released. So the question is, what does Rashi mean by saying kriyut meya? The phone is moving as they put the shomikra as they gather from chusuk kipurim by yearless if it didn't even. And based on this, we have to come to the conclusion that according to Rashi, according to Pshuti Shomikra, even though by the other people that became tamei, the mechusar kippurim, either there's Rambam shita or there's Ravid shita, either she's tamei or she's not. But by a yildis, there is a third way, a third approach. What's the third approach? The tumas leida is nifke geworden gleich noch die shivas yamim. The tumah of the birth was lifted immediately at the end of the 7 days, or 14. Und die schwededike Tage sind im Shela. And therefore the days that follow, the 33 days for the boy, the 66 days for the girl, are called Yimei Te'er, days of Tahara. Und die Riber kemen auf ihr nicht sagen, shei Tmeya. But you cannot say, and therefore you cannot say upon her that she's Tmeya, because she already is experiencing days of Tayar. Aber lidoch, is der Tam, was is also lechel bekotschen, busy bringt dem Korban, is nicht der Fall, was es dar zu kommentare zu der Korban. The reason that this woman is not allowed to eat kachim is not because we're waiting for more Tara to be able to eat the carbon that will be brought about by the carbon. There's a unique din, a special din by a woman who gave birth. As I feel nachdem wie die Tumah is von ihrer weg, that even after the Tumah left, verbleibt noch dem Shem Tumah. The label of Tumah, the name of Tumah remains upon her. Kruyot Tmeya, busy bring the carbon la kaparasa. Until she brings the carbon, there is still a lingering tumah upon her. Not the tumah of Leda, but there is some tumah that is upon her that because of which she cannot eat this carbon. We're going to have to explain this, but we'll take one step at a time. Und da sagt Rashi, Mishane umadgish, and therefore Rashi says, changes from the Gemara and also from the Rambam. I mean, saying not that it's different than the Rambam. Umadgish, Rashi is emphasizing. V'tahera or v'tahara miklal sha'ad kan nikriyot meya. Until this point, she's called Tami. Nitvi in the Gemara miklal sha'it meya. There's two messages in Rashi. Aleph, she is blaze kriyot meya. She's only called Tamei, but she's not actually Tamei. Beis aber das is a hemshich from frier ad kan he kriyot meya. It's still something that is lingering from what was there before. In other words, according to the Rambam, a new chiyuv kicked in. The tumah was lifted. There's now a new chiyuv of bringing a carbon. That until she brings a carbon, she can't eat kachim. So something new arrived. According to Rashi, it's not something new. Something remains on her that forbids her from eating kachim, even though the tumah of Leda was lifted. In Sifei, the Rebbe is going to explain what this is. In other words, to take it slowly, in Sif Gimel, the Rebbe introduced that Rashi has a third approach. By saying Kruya Tumeya, he is negating the fact that she's Tamei, and we explained because the pasuk says Yimei Tahara. So he's negating the fact that she's Tamei, but there's still a shame tumah on her. There's a lingering tumah upon her, which is why she can't eat a carbon, can't eat kachim, which is different than what the Rambam says, that the real reason she can't eat kachim is because there's a new isser of eating kachim until she brings a carbon. Before the Rebbe Sifhei explains what is this lingering tumah upon her, the Rebbe first has to explain the hechech of Sudash Mikra. In other words, whenever very often in the Rashi Sichos, the Rebbe's question is, what's the hechlech? What compels Rashi to say this according to Sudash Mikra? So if the Rebbe is explaining what Rashi is saying, the Rebbe has to also, it doesn't have to, but the Rebbe also offers us a hechlech. What compels Rashi to go down this way? Yeshleimar the hechlech of the dem in Sudash Mikra. Yeshleimar wird nimmers in Pirush Rashi durch noch Hashini von Gemara. We'll pick up the hechrich by first noticing another deviation in Rashi from the Gemara. Besides the fact that the Gemara said Miklal Shi Tmeya, and Rashi said Kruya Tmeya, which was, as we're seeing, a major deviation from the Gemara, there's another deviation from the Gemara as follows. In Gemara steht die Drasha Miklal Shi Tmeya von Wort Vita Heira, Shebesima Parsha V'chiper Allah Kain Vita Heira. The Gemara tells on the word at the pasuk Ches, the end of this section of Yildis, where it says V'chiper Allah Kain V'tahera, and the Gemara tells on the word V'tahera and says Miklal she ad Kani Tmeya. But Rashi sagt es auf a friedike pasuk. Rashi brings this on the previous pasuk Zayin, where it says V'yikrivoi lifnei Hashem, and he'll bring it before Hashem, he'll offer it before Hashem, V'chiper Allah, and he will atone for her, the Kayin, V'tahara mimker dama, and she'll become tamei from the tumah that originated in the blood. V'lecheda, V'bald, as Rashi learned, Beklal Sha'ad Kani Kruya Tmeya, as do is eich frier nit given kin tumah nor blaze Hashem tumah. Since Rashi is telling us that till the carbon is brought, Rashi holds that there's no actual tumah here. There's just a shame tumah, just a name of tumah here. Weil doch mehr gepasst zu bringen die Drasha auf ein Wort V'tahera, Heidi Sheina Tzruya. It would have made more sense for Rashi to bring this on the second time where it says V'tahera with a tzedei, Shebesima Parsha. Wie zu bringen es auf ein Wort V'tahara, Hebe Pasach mit Kerdamel. Was ist Madgish, die Pulas Atara mit Tumah. V'tahara mimker damel means she becomes tahir from the tumah that was brought upon by the fact that there was blood. So if Rashi's point of the limud is that she wasn't tameh anymore, she was just had a shame tumah, then Rashi should have preferred the v'tahera, which is talking about a total tahara, not coming from a place of tumah specifically, over the tahara mimker damel, which is a tahara from a tumah. So why is it that Rashi chooses specifically the V'tahara mimker damel to teach me the limud that Atkan Hikruya Tmeya? So number one, it's a shini from the Gemara. Number two, it would have flowed better, seemingly would have fitted better for Rashi's Pirush to be on the second V'tahara. Nor the beard in them. The beard is as follows. Lulid nepasik v'tahara mimker damel. If it didn't say these words, that she becomes tahir from mimker damel. Volt ben gelernt as der isel lechel bekachim is klar nit verbunden mit tumah. No, this is an isel study. If it didn't say v'chiper Allah v'tahara mimker damel, just v'chiper Allah, then I would have thought that the fact that she can't eat kachim is not because of tumah. No, this is an isid study, was mitzad dem, was you felt of the post carbon. That the fact that she can't eat the kachim is because she didn't bring a carbon yet, which is what the Rambam says. Without the words v'tar mimker damel, I would have said there's no tumah here at all. The tumah is totally over. The only reason she's not yet eating kachim is because of a separate side thing. She didn't bring her carbon yet. But since the pasuk emphasizes that where is the tara coming from, or in other words, what was previously the tumah of mekir damel, kumtuis as the tara was felt here is nit place weil sie hat noch nit gebracht im korban, nur weil es noch verblieben tumah mekir damel. The pasuk is telling us that there is still some tumah remaining. It's not total tara. Wie stimmt das damit, was der Pasuk sagt, Hashem, the Labet Gimel Yom seine Yemei Tayar? So if you're telling me that some tumah remains, then how could you tell me that the Lamed Gimel Yom, the 33 days, are called Yemei Tayar? Therefore, Rashi has to say, as Michlal Sha'at Kani Kriyot Meya, she's called Tamei. Afal Pivas the Tume Shenifke Gebarin, but the Shem Tume noch geblieben afir. So Rashi therefore explains to us that the Tume was removed, but the lingering name of Tume still remains upon her. So the whole source of Rashi is from V'taharam Imker Damel. The fact that the Torah said that there is some Tumah here, but the Torah also said that it's Yimei Tayar. Therefore Rashi compromises, so to speak, that the Tumah left, but the same Tumah remains. And since Rashi's whole source for it is for V'taharam Imker Damel, therefore Rashi stelts sich on those words and teaches this limud. And this is the hechrich why Rashi has to go this way. Rashi can't go any other way. Because once the Torah says V'taharam Imker Damel, the Torah is telling us that there is some tumah here. There's a Taharam Imker Damel. At the same time it said Yimei Tayar. Therefore Rashi has to explain that the tumah was nifka, the tumah was lifted, but the same tumah remained. So in Sif Gimel, the Rebbe introduced this concept that Rashi has a new approach, Al Pi Pshuti Shel Mikra, that by a Yeldis, even though the 33 days are Yemei Tayar, nevertheless there is still a shame Tumah, which is why it says V'taharam Imker Damel or V'tahera in the next pasuk. And the Raya, Rashi's hechrich is from the fact that it says Mimker Damel, implying that there is some Tumah remaining there. So therefore he can't totally remove the Tumah, and therefore he says shame Tumah. The question is, what does this mean? What does it mean shame Tumah? Rashi is not a sefer that gives reasons for halacha. Rashi is here to explain the psukim. What is it relevant to understand the pasuk? To understand what she could do, what she can do, to telling us that the reason why she can't eat kachim is because she was called tmeya. What's it adding? Bezi, bald the tumah from the yellow shenifke geworden. Farvosel bayer bleiben dem shem tumah busy brengt dem carbon. And here is the bigger question: if the tumah of Leda was lifted, then why Taka is she called? Does she carry the name Tmeya upon her until she brings a carbon? Why can't you say tumah is over? She can't eat kachim. Fine, bring a carbon. Bring kachim. Why is there a shame tumah? So now we have to introduce another question. So far, we run through this very smoothly. We have a Rambam and a Rabbi that argue over the case of Mechusar Kippurim after Tvila, after Hariv Shemesh, before he brings his karbanos. What's the din? The Rambam says he's not tamei anymore, but he still can't eat kachim. The Rabbi says he is tamei and he's chayiv misa. Rashi said he's not tamei by a yoldis. There is a unique din, and that is that although she's not tummy anymore, but she's still kriya shem tuma. What's the hechrich from the words mimker dameha? That since it says the Torah mimker dameha, implying that there is some tuma there. So we know that there's that Rashi says, so therefore it's a shame tuma. She's not tumah anymore because that's what we call it Yimei Tayar, but there's still a shame tuma. So the question is, why does Rashi tell this to us, and what does it even mean a shame tuma? Monoshach, if she's tired, if she's not tummy anymore, she's not tummy anymore. So in order to understand this, we have to introduce a brand new question. The Rebbe spoke in many sichas that Rashi answers or addresses every question that comes up in Pshutas HaMikra. Why does Rashi not explain why does a woman who gave birth need to bring a chatas for an atonement? What kind of sin did she commit that she should have to be given an atonement? This is actually a very basic question and requires an answer. Many of the commentators in the Torah ask this question. Nochmer, additionally, in Pirush Rashi le'el, we find in an earlier Rashi, as Rashi bavarin b'karban elah, wo steht v'nirtzulei lechaper alav. By karban elah, the passage says v'nirtzulei, it will be accepted to Hashem, or for the person, lechaper alav, to atone for the person. So Rashi says, al ma'u meratza. What does he need a forgiving for? In other words, if it was a lav, or a chi of misa, then there's punishments for that. The punishment's forgiven. And Rashi answers al esa on on not fulfilling a mitzvah saseh, a positive mitzvah, va'alav shenitik lasa, or a leisasa, a negative mitzvah that is connected to a mitzvah, like for example, not steal, which if chas v'shalom, if a person stole, there is a mitzvah to return what he stole, and therefore there's no malchus for that lav because it's nitik less, it's connected to an esa. So therefore, if there was no punishment, then where is his atonement? The carbon oila. So you see that when Rashi sees a kapara for someone who we don't know that they did an aveda, Rashi has to ask, what's the kapara coming for? And here Rashi doesn't address it. Upashit as mekenit zogin as Rashi v'alosachaf and bir in Gemara. We can't say that Rashi is relying on what the Gemara says. The Gemara says that when a woman is giving birth, because of the pain that it involves, she promises that she's never going to have children again. So now she has to break her promise. So because breaking a promise is a sin, so she has to bring a korban chatas. But obviously Rashi is not relying on this because this is not pshutus mikra. Ubefrata says there's afilinit miramis. Especially since Rashi does not allude to it in any way. Clearly Rashi is not relying on that. Muzman zog, and therefore we must say, and this is the Rebbe's approach in Rashi, as the Ben Chamish Lemikre versteht es meyatzmei letutus Lemikre. Was Chen gelernt? The Ben Chamish Lemikre, the student of Chumash, will glean from something he already learned that there is a need for kapara here, which Rashi does not need to address it. The Rebbe says very often that if Rashi didn't say anything, it's because Rashi knows that the Ben Chamish Lemikra could figure it out on his own, based on something he already learned. So if the Rashi does not address why the Isha Hayiledes, the woman who gave birth, why she needs to bring a korban chatas, it's because it's out there somewhere in our information that we already learned previously. Kidul Lekamon, as the Rebbe will explain in Sivav. Shas melent isha ki Tazria v'yalda gemer v'tama gemer kimin nidas devoisa. Parshas Yiledes. When we begin to learn the parsha of Yiledes, when it says that when a woman gives birth, she becomes tamei like the days of her of a nida. Der month is gleich af and siro von isha leide v'tzar. It automatically reminds us that there's a connection between a woman giving birth and having pain. Als einish of achet, which comes as a consequence for a sin that was once committed. In Parshas Bereshis, was the Rebbe gesagt Chaven noch ihr chet beitzadas, referring, of course, to Parshas Bereshis, where Hashem tells Chava after she sinned with the Eitzadas, eating from the tree of knowledge. Elo Isha Amar, to the woman, he said, Harba arbe itzveinich vehireinich, I will increase your suffering and your pregnancy. Be'etzev tel dibanim, with suffering you will give birth to children. Every birth, which is a byproduct of pregnancy, of conception, comes together with pain, the pain of pregnancy, and the pain, the pain of birth. But each one of these births, with the pain that they entail, contain within themselves a part of the punishment, the consequence for chet sadas. When a woman gives birth, and he sees in the pasuk kimei nidas devaisa that this is something that is connected to pain, the Ben Chamish Lemikra says, why is the woman experiencing pain when having a baby? And right away the answer is because this is what was told to Chava as a consequence from her chet of the Eitza Das. Because of this, all these years later, this woman who's giving birth is doing so with tsar. And automatically we can now connect the explanation for the tumah. For Nayeldis of a woman who gives birth, even in a case where there's no dam. As the Rebbe brings in the heart of the discussions about if the blood is what initiates, what triggers the tumah, or it's the birth. But what's the word? Since the birth comes with pain as an outcome of Chet Hadas, which means Chet Hadas is being invoked here. The fact that Chava sinned with Eitz Hadas is now being brought to the fore in this birth, and the proof is that it's happening with a great deal of pain. So when invoking the Chet Eitz Hadas brings Tumah to this person as well. Not just the Einus, the punishment of pain in the pregnancy and in the birth, but it also brings on a Tumah. The Rabbi in order 43 to support this Nakuda, he says that after the section where it speaks about eating kosher animals, etc., and it speaks about not eating shkatzim or masim, the insects or creepy, crawly animals, the pasuk says v'leisitamu bahem. Don't become tummy by eating them, which shows that there is a connection between sin and tumah. So when we realize that what's happening over here is connected to the Chet Eitz Hadas, and it brought onto this woman, it brought punishment, it also brings onto this woman tumah. And that's why the Melchama speaker doesn't ask, why is she bringing a carbon? He knows. He sees right away that this is a Chet Eitz Hadas related event, and therefore the Chet brought on the Tumah. So now we understand why the woman who's giving birth has to bring a carbon chatos. Since by every single birth, by every single woman, there is a piece of the Chet Eitz Hadas present. She has to bring a kapara. So that's why she's bringing a kapara. So our question was, what's the deal with the Shem Tumah? In order to understand the deal with the Shem Tumah, we introduced the fact that when giving birth, a woman brings upon herself, or the Eibishter brings upon her, a tumah due to the Chet Eitz Hadas. Al derech v'Rashi hat schon früher mefares gem beged Chet Egel u'b'yom paktu fakalati, as Rashi said earlier, that the day that I remember and I will remember Tamid k'shafked aleim avenisayim, when I remember and punish them for their sins, ufakalati aleim atmin oven hazeh, I will also punish them for some of this sin, the sin of the Chet Egel. Im shara avenis, with their other sins. There's no punishment that comes upon the Jewish people that does not include some a consequence for the Chet Egel. So similarly, just like when a person sins, he invokes upon himself the Chet Egel, and the punishment includes Chet Egel as well. So too, when a woman gives birth, she invokes upon herself the Chet Eitz Hadas, which is why there's tsar, and by doing so, she also invokes upon herself the Tumah, some tumah that comes from Chet Eitz Hadas, which is why she has to bring a carbon. Late dem beer and tumas later. Now that we understand why there is a tumah, how the tumas later happens, why a woman becomes tamei from the later. This will explain another Rashi. And the word v'yikrivoi is lashon yachid. He brings it. The kohen brings it, meaning the carbon. So Rashi says, from this we learn that only one of the two karbanos, the Isha Yeldas, brings the Eilan Achatos, but only it's the V'yikrivoi. He brings what's the Lashon HaPasik? The Lashon HaPasik is V'yikrivoi lifnei Hashem v'chipir aleh v'tar v'meker dameh. He brings it before Hashem. He atones for her, and she becomes tahir v'meker dameh. So Rashi says the fact that it says that Lashon Yachid V'yikrivoi teaches me that only one of the two karbanos is necessary, so that she should be allowed to eat a kachim. Which one? Which of the two is the one that opens up the door to eat kachim? So Rashi says it's the chatos. Why? Because Misha who ba lechaper, the one that came to atone, boya tara kluya. In it, the tara, the permission to eat kachim is dependent. As the tara from the Isha Yeledes is totally dafki in the carbon chatos, which means that the purification of the Isha, of this woman, is dependent on the chatos, not on the Eila. Because since the tumah came about because of something that needs kapara, in other words, a tumah of a zav or a zava or something like that, it's not something that needs kapara, it's something that happened. And it initiates a tumah, but that's it. By tumas yeldis, we're saying that there is a need for kapara, which is from the Chet Eitz Hadas. So since the tumah happening because of something that requires a kapara is the Iber the Tara from the Tumah verbundet damit was bedenkt the kapara. So therefore the Tara is waiting for the carbon. So the fact that Rashi says that Dafke the Chatos is the one that allows her to eat kachim makes so much more sense now. Because now we understand that the Tumah is not just because she gave birth. The Tumah is because of the Chetes Adas, which is something that requires kapara. So it makes sense that how are we going to get rid of that? Through a chatos, which atones for this thing that needs kapara. Now we understand the whole flow of Rashi. After Rashi tells us on the word v'yikrivoi that the tara of the yildis is dependent on kapara, that the purification of the woman who gave birth is dependent on her atonement. So now we understand that how did this happen? How did we get here? There was a Chetz Hadas, and the Chetz Hadas was invoked in this case by the pain of the birth, and therefore brought upon a tumah upon her, and therefore she had to bring a carbon chatos, which lifts that tumah from her. So now that we understand what that is there mamshich l'tara miklash at kanikriyat meya. Nachdem wie man weiß, as the tumah from the yildis the wind with Chetz Hadas. Now that I know that the tumah of the woman who gave birth is connected to the Chetz Hadas, und der Iber is irtada verbunden mit der kapara, and therefore she needs to have an atonement in order to become tahir. Is verstandig at kanikriyat meya. We understand that there's still a lingering tumah on her, and the name tamei afilu nachdem. Die Tumme ist von ihr Nifke geworden. Aber Kol's man said noch nicht ihr Kapara is in noch als Kriyut Meya. That even after you remove the actual Tumma, which was brought about by the Leda, by the Dam, etc., it's still, there's something that wasn't done yet. There's a Tumma that came upon her because of the Chetz Hadas. And that needs a carbon for it to be lifted. And that's why he says, don't call her Tmeya, because once she's a Mechusar Kippurim, she's not Tmeya anymore. But she's still Kruya Tmeya. She still has the name Tmeya upon her because of the Chetz Hadas, and that she needs a Chatas to get rid of. What's the difference? Is there a difference between not being Tamei and waiting for a Dover Noisaf, waiting for a dud study, a side thing, such as the carbon, to permit her to eat a kachim, which is what the Rambam says, or what Rashi is saying in Pshudish Mikra, that she's not Tamei, but she's Kruya Tmeya. What's the difference? What is the relevance? Then the Isra Achilas Kachim will give them place mitzad dem was ihr felt noch Gmar Tara. If the Isra to eat Kachim is only because she's lacking the completion of her Tara process, like the Rambam says, Hat an Ort as the Isra vet sich nicht misdare sein zu bringen ihr carbon zu kennen Gassen mit Kachim. There could be a case that the woman is not going to rush, especially if she doesn't live in Yerushalayim and she's not eating kachim. Then what's the big deal? What's the rush to run to Beis Hamikdash to be able to bring her carbon so that we should be able to eat kachim? She just had a baby just a few weeks ago, and she's schwach. Why should she run to the Beis Hamikdash to bring her carbon if she's not eating kachim anyway? We don't find a specific obligation upon a non-kohen that he should be in a state of tara to be able to eat kachim. Before the Yom Tovim, where Chacham say that a person should make himself Torah so that he could take part in the festivities. But generally speaking, a woman had a baby in the middle of Chedesh Tevis, what would be her rush to run to Yerushalayim to bring a carbon? But if you're saying she's called Tommy because she's lacking kapara, if it's about tuma, just tuma, in other words, that she can't eat kachim, what's the rush? But if it's because she needs a kapara, nobody wants to go around needing kapara. So as soon as she gave birth and she brought upon herself this remnant of the Chetz Hadas, and now she has a chance to get rid of it, she wants to rush as soon as possible to get rid of it. And this explains to us the Shita of Rashi so beautifully and so perfectly, going through the psukim, the pasuk of V'yikrivoi, the pasuk of Yemei Toyar, where Rashi says, doesn't say Toyar Eitzel Baila, but says Yemei because Rashi holds that she's actually Toyar, the Tumah is over, but at the same time it says V'tar Ramim Ker Dameh, so it must mean that Shem Tumah is Kriya Aleh. Why does Rashi not say anything? Because he's relying on our knowledge of the Chet Tzadas, but at the same time, we understand that the Tumah later was released. There's still a Shem Tumah Aleh, and that is gotten rid of through the carbon on the final day after the 40 days. Chazal sagen as the Eibishter Ma'ashu Eisem El Yisrael Lasses. The Eibishter does all of the commandments that he has given to us. Davon verstanden, dass Hashem der Eibishter will as soll nicht sein nach viel in der Matze von Kriya Belvat Tmeya. Just like Hashem does not want us to even be in a state of being called Tamei. Und soll bringen a carbon kapara. Hashem wants us to rush as soon as possible to bring a carbon so that we should go out of the state of Kriya Tmei, of being referred to as Tamei. Azay eich fühlt sich der Eibishter mit Yidden. The Eibishter must do the same with Yidden. As wenn man is begalus und Yidden sein Kriya Tmei. When we are in galus and we have the name Tamei on us. Ukipsak din Rambam as jeder redet bechol makim. Because man is it saying about Peter's emes nor ton nor Hashem. The Rambam Paskins, as we brought many times in Hilchas Gerushin, that every Yid in every time and every place wants to do everything that the Eibishter wants. And the fact that a Yid might not do so is because he's forced by his Yetzirah. Especially after all of these terrible and frightening decrees and persecutions. The pangs of Mashiach that Yidden already experienced. And especially in this this last generation. Which is why it's Kriyot Tmei, not actually Tamei, because really they want to do the right thing. It's just that they're being forced by the Yetzirah and by the situation around them to do things that they don't really want to do. It's only Kriyot Tmei. But Nem der Eibishter, but since the Eibishter follows his own instructions, Nem der Eibishter, the Yidden from the Maimon Matzah of Kriyot Tmei, Hashem takes out the Jewish people from this situation, from the Golus in which they are called Tamei. V'chas v'shalom to sagen as emetzer the epeskin l'makiv zayin. God forbid to say that something or somebody can stop him. When es kumt bis rizus hachigdel, and it comes to the greatest taste. Will nor as by Eden azol eich zayin the tshuke. V'reiskim bis rizus. The Eibishter wants that Yidden should want it. As the Gemara says, one of the questions that were asked is tzipisa liyeshua, did you await the Yeshua? To go immediately out of Galus, from the Matzah from Kriya Tmeya, to go out of a state where we are called Tamei, and to go to our complete Tara, and it comes in a way of, it will be with the clouds of heaven. Achishena in Achishena. Within Achishena, Achishena means to come in a quicker way, but within the quicker way, it should come even quicker. Miyad Mamish Ba'agala Didan.